Welcome to this month's edition of Field Notes. I'm your host, Jeff Weisenberger. This month's guest is Cindi Duncan, who has been with AISC for a total of almost 3 decades now. She is currently our Director of Engineering and oversees our standards and manuals development. Welcome, Cindi.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. It's nice to do these in person. I don't get to do that very often. Let's start from the beginning. So where are you from and where did you grow up?
I grew up in the Midwest in Iowa, in our neighboring state here. My mom grew up in a small farming community called Osceola, Iowa.
I've heard of Osceola, but remind me, what part of the state is that in?
That's southern Iowa.
Okay.
Almost Missouri, but about an hour north of Missouri.
Is it near Ottumwa?
No.
Okay.
Maybe. No.
Gotcha.
Nothing's really near.
It's not near anything. Okay.
And then my dad grew up in Nebraska, northern
Okay.
Nebraska, on a ranch, but they both grew up during the Depression.
Okay.
So I grew up in a fairly modest home in Iowa, but my formative years were mostly in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I was born in Osceola, where my mother was from, but then they moved around, and then we ended up in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, which is considered a small, medium city in Iowa, but my dad always called it an overgrown farm town, basically. Even and we didn't do. I don't come from a farming family. Pretty much blue collar. Like I said, modest beginnings. My dad worked really hard and worked himself into a sales position and ended up owning his own business, ultimately changing his career. My mom ended up selling real estate, but neither one had a college education.
Okay.
So I was the first one in my family to obtain a degree in college, a college degree.
Well, that's great to hear. So speaking of which, where did you go to school and what did you study?
I went to the University of Iowa, started out there for 2 years, and I was pre-med student at the time. I always wanted to be a doctor, since my first biology class in middle school.
Okay.
And then when they moved to Colorado, I followed them. I transferred to University of Colorado in Boulder and ended up changing to architectural engineering in the middle of my junior year.
What made you change?
So I'd taken a lot of liberal arts classes, and I really enjoyed that. But then one day I realized how expensive it was to go to medical school.
Yeah.
My parents worked really hard for me to go to college. They always supported it, even though they didn't really understand what that meant because they didn't have that experience. And I knew they couldn't help support me through a medical school education.
Sure.
So I really enjoyed the sciences, and my roommate's dad owned a structural engineering company in Denver, and I thought, I think that sounds really interesting, working on designing buildings and constructing them. And so I changed to architectural engineering at that point. So I ended up getting an BS in architectural engineering from University of Colorado at Boulder, and then I actually went on for a master's of engineering degree at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York.
Okay. Once you started getting into, going down that path of architectural engineering, did you start noticing buildings more? And if so, were there certain ones that were sort of, kind of inspiring early on? Yes,
I would say I was always fascinated by high-rise buildings. The Sears Tower at the time. I've been to New York City a couple times in high school on music trips. And so I always thought I would be designing high-rise buildings someday. So that was kind of what I had envisioned myself doing.
Okay. So can you talk a little bit about your career then, your early career as an engineer?
So after I got my bachelor's degree, I did get a job with a construction management company in Toledo, Ohio. I lived there for a couple of years, and it was called the Lathrop Company. So I started out as a project engineer in the field.
Okay.
And we were starting from the ground up, I learned a lot on that project because it was starting from the beginning. And I remember walking around in my rubber boots, and we were drilling caissons and getting my feet stuck because it was so muddy and the mud was about a foot deep. But I kind of made me know I didn't want to be in the field or a field engineer. Also, as a woman, I didn't appreciate the way I was treated in the field. you have iron workers and things whistling at you, and I didn't feel that well respected, and I didn't want to fight that battle. So I decided I would go back to school, get a master's of engineering degree, and from Cornell, and then that's when I landed at AISC. So my husband got a job in Chicago, so we ended up moving to Chicago, and then I found an ad from AISC looking for a staff engineer in the Chicago Tribune. Of course, we had ads back then, printed ads,
right?
And interviewed with the vice president of engineering at the time, Dr. Gerhard Heyer, and he actually knew my steel professor at Cornell University, William McGuire, who's a well-known professor there, steel professor, wrote a really good textbook, and he really respected William McGuire and knew him, and so I got the job. And I've been at AISC ever since. I'd done very little design. I did do a little for the 5 years that I worked and stayed home with my children. I did a little bit of design on the side, but mostly my careers consisted of working at AIC, developing standards and manuals.
Okay, sure. Can you talk a little bit about the committees you're on, and maybe some of the standards, and that you work with the standards and manuals?
Yes. So as you said, I've been here nearly 3 decades. Starting out in the mid-'80s, I worked with the Committee on Specifications a little bit, and you get to work with a lot of different types of people, from educators to consulting engineers to steel fabricators and producers. I've served as secretary of the Committee on Specifications, the Committee on Manuals, and now also the Committee on Structural Stainless Steel, and that's been a great, unusual experience for a structural engineer. I've also been the editor of Engineering Journal, and also directly responsible for the development of design guides in the past. So I've worn a lot of different hats at AISC, and it's been a very interesting career.
Sure. No, I mean, yeah, you've kind of run the gamut of our publications, and I'm sure that you've probably got lots of stories. Well, I want to ask you a little bit more about your work on committees in a second, but just in terms of publications, can you tell me maybe one of your biggest success stories in terms of one of the manuals or standards?
I would say that I can't think of one publication that was a big success story, but I feel like because we have to schedule our standards and manuals 6 years in advance and have to meet certain deadlines, I feel like every time a new standard comes out on time, that's a success story. And our specification, for example, has to be adopted by ASCE 7, and also the International Building Code, so we have to meet certain deadlines to make sure we get it into specific editions of those standards to be adopted and used, by the authorities having jurisdiction all over the country. So I think just meeting the schedule and getting the committee to do their work and getting all the balloting done by those deadlines, I think that's the biggest success every time.
Sure. And I think that's something that, well, some people probably understand and others might not, is that obviously a big part of it is the committee work. And so, trying to get everybody on the same page, or pages, so to speak. So, when it comes to the committees, I'm guessing you've witnessed some interesting or some rather heated discussions here or there. I'm just curious if you had any interesting stories like that about that.
Well, you'd be surprised what people are passionate about when it comes to our standards development or even our manuals development. And because you have a mix of fabricators and educators and consulting engineers, you have all their different backgrounds and viewpoints and where they're coming from. So I'd say in the mid-'80s when I came here, the biggest debate was what column curve to use. So that was a very technical discussion, and a lot of the educators got very passionate, and there were some heated discussions about that. Mainly the educators are the ones that really cared about the column curves. But we can have debates from column curves all the way to whether a glossary term should be italicized in the specification. the arguments can get very passionate, and they used to get more heated, I'd say, early on in my career here.
Mm-hmm.
But I think because AISC has become ANSI accredited,
Mm-hmm.
so most of our standards are following an ANSI process.
Sure.
So what that means is, for example, the Committee on Specifications has 45 members. We have to have exactly equal numbers of industry people, general interest, which includes educators, and then consulting engineers. And so that balances the discussion out. We have pretty equal distribution on our task committees also that work under the Committee on Specifications. And I think the fact that our procedures also require us to address all the negatives and fully vet all the negatives and
Mm-hmm.
respond to them all. And then if the negative voter doesn't want to withdraw or remove their negative,
Mm-hmm.
they have to be reballoted, so the committee gets to review the revision again and consider their comments in a formal ballot and get the chance to revote again based on their negative comments. So I think that's maybe reduced the number of more heated discussions
Sure.
than when I first came to AISC. And so AISC, like the specification, has only been ANSI accredited since the 2005 specification.
Okay.
So it's relatively a new development.
Okay, sure. And I want to get back to something you were talking about earlier about being a field engineer and kind of having a negative experience, or at least maybe not the most comfortable experience as a female. I understand you are the first female engineer at AISC. Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Sure. So I think that one of the reasons I got hired as the first female engineer in the mid-'80s was Dr. Heyer, who was the vice president of engineering and research at the time. Again, knew my professor, but he was open to a woman engineer because he actually had 3 daughters that were engineers of different types of engineering, not all structural. But so he really understood women in engineering and the balance of a home and work, and that it can be done. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like that's why I got hired. For a long time, I was the only woman in the room. Okay. For the first 7-8 years that I was with AISC. And I just got used to that. I didn't mention earlier, but I had 3 brothers. I was the one girl very spoiled because of that, I think. But I think that helped me because I didn't feel that uncomfortable. I don't ever really feel uncomfortable. And also in school, it was mostly all men. Mm-hmm. Maybe 10 or 12, 15% were women, even when I went to school in the 80s. Since then, AISC has hired several women engineers. I'd say it took a while, though, before they turned the corner.
Sure.
Probably 15 years later, after I was hired, they started hiring a lot of women engineers. At one point in the last 10 years or so, we had more women engineers than men, I believe, on the committees back in the beginning. For example, I thought of one story, and one of the committee members, we were reviewing a provision in the specification that said, it was about installing bolts, snug tight, and it said the full impact, it said something like the full strength of an iron worker. And one of the committee members looked straight across at me at the table and said, I don't think we mean like if Cindi were doing this, implying that as a woman I wouldn't have the same strength as a man tightening a bolt. But so that was the kind of comments that you would get once in a while, but I would have to say now we don't experience that. And also I want to add, our committees now are more diverse as far as gender. Mm-hmm. We finally added our first woman to the Committee on Specifications, I think in the last 5 years. And now in the next cycle that starts next year, we're probably going to have about 6 women on out of the 45 members on the Committee on Specifications. So AISC definitely is making progress in that.
Sure.
And having more diversity as far as gender.
Yeah, pushing in the right direction.
Yes.
Well, on that note, do you have? I was going to ask what sort of advice might you have for young women looking to get into engineering or construction in general?
I would say you have to expect to be one of the few women in the room. First, you have to be comfortable with that. In civil engineering in particular, I think women, out of all the engineering fields, women are less likely to go into civil engineering. And maybe, again, like the things I was pointing out about being in the field, iron workers, and still perception of women. But I really would. Any woman that wants to go into structural engineering, make sure you get as much education as you can. Get a master's degree if you can do that. Even if you go back and get one, try to do that early on. But most importantly, make sure you get licensed as soon as possible. Go through what you need to do to become a licensed engineer as early on as you can. The harder and the further you get away from school, the more difficult it is to pass those licensure exams, and I ran into that. So just do everything you can early on when you're young and your life is maybe not as complicated.
Sure. Well, switching gears a little bit from engineering and AISC and manuals and specifications and standards, let's talk a little bit about some of your outside interests. What do you like to do?
I really enjoy music. I have a piano at home, so I try to play the piano, especially classical music. And that's that whole, is it left brain? I don't know. Anyway,
I forget, but I know what you're saying.
Yeah. And then I like to sing. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, I haven't been able to participate in choirs much because they're not letting us sing in groups right now. But I did take some voice lessons recently. I'd like to, when I retire, perhaps learn how to play a stringed instrument like a viola or something like that. And then my family, of course, is at the top of my list. I like to spend time with my 3 children, and I also have 2 stepchildren. I also have 1 grandchild, Henry, who's now 2 years old.
That's great.
Yeah.
I'll ask a little bit more about them in a second. But so when it comes to the piano and the singing, first of all, what kind of piano do you have? Not brand. Do you have an upright? Do you have a baby grand or a grand?
I actually have 2 grands.
Oh, wow.
I have one here in Chicago and at our home in Santa Fe. So I like to have the nice. They're smaller grands, but
sure.
So I do like to play the piano, and I took lessons. I actually taught myself how to play piano. My mom played.
I was going to ask. Okay.
So she taught me. I didn't take lessons till about 8th grade. So I took formal lessons for about 5 years. I did take 1 year on the side. I took from a PhD student. I took piano in college also. But I also played the oboe in high school.
Wow.
So I had to give that up.
Yeah.
But so I played the oboe. And I always encourage everyone, if you can, learn a musical instrument. But
sure, it keeps your brain active. It's fun. So you said mostly classical.
Yeah, that's my main interest. I do like jazz. I'd like to maybe learn to play jazz a little more. I've been trying to memorize songs because I never really got very good at memorizing. I'm not one that ever learned to play by ear, even though I taught myself. And again, I think it was the way my brain works. I can grasp onto the technical aspect of learning the notes and the different key signatures, and getting both hands to work and following everything on the sheet music or whatever. So but I would like to learn how to maybe improvise. That would be another thing that would be good to do.
That's the thing about music. It is a formula of sorts, and there's a structure to it. But the improv, it's a whole nother realm.
Yeah, I think I'd have to learn that.
I was a decent trumpet player, and I was in our jazz band, and I could play. I played the French horn too, but I could play the trumpet fairly well. Just I could hit the notes, but I was not the first, I wasn't the top trumpet player in the jazz band, because that guy and a couple of other folks could solo and improvise, and they could just go off and start playing notes. Yeah. I could do that. I could play notes and move my fingers and play random notes, but it didn't sound good when I did it. It sounded good when they did it. So let me know if you figure out improv, because I wonder if there's a secret there. No, that's great. That's great to hear. So where does Henry live? Are your kids all in the area, or is everybody all over the place?
I have 1 daughter, and my grandson and her husband are in the suburbs in Warrenville, here in Illinois. Mm-hmm. So my daughter, I have twins, and she and her husband are in New York City, and I have a son and his wife. They're in Columbus, Ohio.
Great.
And so they're kind of spread out a little bit right now.
Yeah.
The children.
But it's nice that it's good to have a connection in New York. New York City like that.
It is. Yeah, we just visited them there last weekend. That was fun. Sure. Definitely.
And I should say Columbus too. My mom's from Columbus. I like Columbus.
Yeah.
So and as you were saying, you split your time between Chicago and Santa Fe, and I'll ask it for both places, and I'll start with Chicago. What are some of the things you enjoy most about Chicago?
I really like the cultural activities and opportunities. Again, I love going to the symphony, the Chicago Symphony, which is now back in person. I've been to one concert this fall. We have 2 more lined up to go to, my husband and I. And I like just the feel of a large city, the energy and the excitement and the tall buildings and the architecture in Chicago. So I feel like the pandemic has put a bit of a damper on that, unfortunately, but I think it'll come back. So the Chris Kindle Market was open, for example, over the weekend.
I noticed.
And
That's
they
great.
had the big lights parade and all that. So yeah, it's good that things are kind of coming back now. So I really enjoy the large city feel. I don't know that I'll live here when I retire, probably not in the city, but always come back to visit and spend time here. So.
Well, that's great. And so, same question for Santa Fe.
So Santa Fe is completely different. It's very quiet. We live in the country there, and we love the outdoor. My husband and I, the outdoor activities, hiking. We especially love hiking, and the views are gorgeous. It's a different view than Chicago. The views of the mountains. We like to ski still, and like I said, hiking and golf there. I'm going to learn how to golf, hopefully, in my retirement.
It's a good one for retirement, they say. Yeah, it is.
It's a tough sport.
It's frustrating, but it's fun.
But I have to say that, and Santa Fe is a smaller city. It's a small city, but it is the capital of New Mexico. So there's a lot of cultural opportunities. I know. I actually do too, but great restaurants. It's probably one of the few places I found of my travels in the country that has restaurants that rival Chicago, and we're a little spoiled in Chicago with our restaurants. And Santa Fe has great chefs and people that have opened different restaurants there. So, and it also has culture. It has the Santa Fe Opera. So I feel like an advertisement for Santa Fe
Oh,
now,
yeah, no, that's okay. I want to go to Santa Fe now.
I hope you do.
I've been there before, but it was a long time ago. So speaking of Santa Fe and food, can you explain the phenomenon of green chili to people, or hatch chilies? And then I have a follow-up question. I have a couple of follow-up questions. So.
Oh, okay. So there's the red chili and the green chili. Is that what you're talking about?
Sure. To those who don't know, green chili is it's a sauce, it's a salsa. You can smother things in it. You can do whatever you want with it, basically. And it's ubiquitous in Santa Fe. Right. And it's big in Colorado, too. And they make it with what they call the hatch chili pepper. But green chili is well known, but then in Santa Fe, it seems like the red chili thing is a big deal. So anyway, 2 amazing types of sauces, I guess. Yeah,
they pour it over. They'll make a big enchilada plate and pour it all over, but you can get it on the side.
It's divine, yeah. And it can be hot, it can be mild, it can be everything in between. And
you never know.
Right, and what do they call it when they mix both colors together?
It's Christmas, which is my favorite.
Right, yeah, you kind of get the best of both worlds with that. If for those who have not been to New Mexico or Santa Fe, that's something you have to get.
Another thing that is different there, and there's different varieties, are mole sauces.
Oh, yeah.
Have you had those?
Oh, yeah.
Some of them have chocolate in them. And
I love mole.
So one of my favorite restaurants is called Cezanne.
Okay.
And my husband loves it too because it has all these mole sauces. And one of the things they do is they'll bring out a little sampler for you at the beginning of the meal, and you can pick out of 3 or 4 different moles. Which one do you want on your meal?
Oh, man.
And they're all just different, like from spicy to kind of sweet to chocolatey, and So that's kind of fun, but it's Santa Fe. The cuisine is very different than Chicago, but it's excellent. So.
Yeah, now you're making me want to go back and spend just a few days and having nothing but delivery devices for moles and chili. or red and green chili.
And then the shed, you can't beat their margaritas.
Okay, good to know. Very
all
good.
the different kinds of tequila.
The shed. I was gonna ask if you had a favorite place or if you'd rather keep it a secret, but you've already let the name slip. So okay, I'm gonna keep both of those places in mind.
Okay.
So I don't think it's a secret that you are going to be retiring or planning to retire by, I think, the end of 2022. Just curious, what are you looking forward to most?
I'm just looking forward to my time being my own time all the time. If I want to sit down and play the piano, if I want to memorize a piece, I can spend all day doing that. If I want to work on a quilt for my new grandchild, I can do that. If I want to go help my parents out who live in Iowa still, I can go over there and spend time with them, and they need help a lot. So I'm looking forward to that, spending more time with my grandson, things like that. I'm also would like to help my mom write her memoirs. She's actually been always wanting to write a book, so she isn't real great with the computer. So helping her type up her memoirs, looking back at the Depression era when she grew up, and just all the different weird stuff that went on that people will forget some days. I mean, her great-grandchildren have no clue what my parents experienced and how much things have changed in their lifetime. They're 93, both my parents, and it's just amazing.